The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to attack. With the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast. Here on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast, you'll find youth and high school coaching tips for coaches, parents, and wrestlers, featuring Gable-trained NCAA champion and Hall of Fame high school coach Daryl Weber. Also featured is a monthly dialogue with legendary wrestling coach Dan Gable. Find out more on AttackStyleWrestling.com. Now, on to the show. Now up on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast, we'll be talking today with NCAA champion and Hall of Fame high school coach Daryl Weber, and joined by the man himself, legendary wrestling coach, Olympic champion, world champion Dan Gable. Today we're talking about practice phases, we're talking about dependence, we're talking about independence. And Daryl, during your time at Iowa, you saw Coach Gable do this type of thing where he would map out the season and determine what was independent and what was dependent. Before we even start, Daryl, what are your memories of that? And then Coach Gable, after Daryl talks about his memories, can you explain kind of what dependent and independent means in the world of wrestling?
Yeah, well, I think, I think Coach Gable's got a very unique insight to all of this. And I know I picked up on techniques and strategies that he used to try to pull out, independence in us as athletes, just by different ways he, let us train in the off season, or different ways he structured live wrestling sessions, and, different, how sometimes how much little touch he had on us. And I look and I see a lot of college coaches, high school coaches that, kind of mess this up a little bit or don't quite get this. I would like to hear Coach Gable, kind of to tell us about, his philosophy of independent and dependent. And then a couple of years ago, I had heard Coach Gable talk about how he would sit down after NCAAs each year and kind of evaluate his team and map out an entire year, a peaking system for an entire year off of this philosophy.
First of all, you got to analyze what year of kid that you're working with. I mean, you just can't throw the ball out, even though, they know how to play basketball when you do that. Most of them have had a basketball hoop for their whole life, or a playground basketball hoop, or a homemade basketball hoop on their door. So I don't see any coaches going in there and telling all these little kids that are in these houses structure, and they just throw that ball through that hoop. Well, I kind of grew up that way myself in my front yard too, but actually right in my front room with a little bit of carpet there. And we just had a lot of wrestling matches because, it was more like the thing to do in Waterloo, Iowa, was to get out and wrestle a little bit. We had all those great coaches at that time, and everybody was kind of wrestling. But, it's one of these things that, maybe I learned it from the beginning because I was born into an environment that wrestled a lot, kind of like a basketball hoop. But it's a little more difficult, yet at the same time, it's kind of a natural thing. Just kids grabbing each other and rolling around and kicking and fighting a little bit. And then the parents just kind of making sure that they're not getting carried away. So, it's kind of hard to say exactly what which one's better than the other, but yet, I think our nation, there's an Independence Day, and I think that's what Americans thrive on. And it's probably the difference between the Russians and the Americans. And they're programmed a little bit more than we are. And they don't have the ability to, just think on their own. They hadn't for years, maybe it's coming that way, but, they always were like a coach was totally in charge. And I think that's an edge that we kind of have on them in a certain way. But when they are really militaristic, sometimes a program can be programmed into these guys and they can become really good. And their history shows that in sport. But if you really wanted to beat them, you had to deprogram them, and that means you really had to be a guy that had that independence, and it makes a big difference. But let's go back to what Daryl was saying, and we're talking about, I was coaching mostly at the college level, but I coached unbelievable amounts at the international level, and so you would think there'd be a little bit more dependence at that college level, or even more at the high school level, or even more at the junior high level as compared to the upper level, especially when you don't have a team going too much full time, even though we do now somewhat with Coach Zadig now running the U.S. teams. But they still come in from all over. They're not mostly just in one spot. So because of that, there is a lot of individuality, and people have to allow that uniqueness and give that person that independence to get the most out of them. I can remember the first day back in '72 when we went to a training camp under Bill Farrell in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There, and all of a sudden, that first practice was so much different than I had and was used to. And I think after the practice, there was 4 of us from the same kind of facility. There was John Peterson, Ben Peterson, Chris Taylor, and myself, who had all trained a lot at Iowa State. And all of a sudden we had a practice that was completely dependent and completely away from what we were used to doing, because Coach Nichols had a lot of those independent type practices where you depended on yourself to push yourself. And when you were done, you were done. So I had a quick talk with Coach Farrell, not a quick one, a pretty good one afterwards. And you know what? He adjusted quickly, and that's a sign of a good coach. I was just reading today somewhere, it's just an article. Oh, it was about hot yoga, believe it. Here I got on hot yoga, but what it was is this girl went to hot yoga, and she went there for the first time, and she wasn't used to it, and she got dizzy, and she was drinking water, but she just couldn't hold up with the rest of the group. And, to me, it was like, wow, why did you let that leader, that coach of that group, why did you let her go through the same thing that these other guys were going through? You got to ease her in. And so he needed to step up and maybe have her only go for half of the time, or watch the group. And if that one person wasn't used to it, you pull her out, and or that type of thing. And you know what? She never came back, and she doesn't like hot yoga, and she's telling everybody that it's not good for you, but it's just a matter of a coach understanding a lot of things about the level he's at, a coach understanding what independence means as compared to dependence. Dependence is teaching more. It's actually with a whistle. And I never used a whistle in my life, so I shouldn't say that, but it's more barking out. It's more actually putting through guys some time situations, some specific drills, as compared to independence, where a kid comes in, picks his partner, just goes, takes a break when he wants to, that type of thing. So, they're both good, and almost every practice can be and should be dependent and independent. It's just that some have more length in each one of the areas, and it's probably like getting closer to competition. You look at it 2 ways. You look at a kid, he needs to do what he needs to do, so you don't want to do the whole team the same thing, so you let him kind of get done what he needs to get done. But at the same time, there's certain things that everybody has to do, and so the coach throws that in there as well, and that's called dependent things. And every day at the end of practice, when they need a little help and you need to do a few extra sprints, that's kind of a dependent, because that's the coach. And you can let the guys do it on their own, but they need help. Dependence is help. Independence is the athlete's helping himself. He needs that. If I would rate either one of them, I would say they're both very valuable, depending on where you're at in your career. But I would say the ultimate goal is to become independent. And never so much that you won't listen to somebody that really has good thoughts and being able to bring you along. But anyway, hey, I just talked for about 15 minutes. I don't know. That's a good start, right?
It is a good start, Coach. And there's one thing that you wrote that said independence in life or in wrestling is the ability to make accomplishments on your own, but knowing that there is help out there to get even better. Now, when you structure practices, when you're talking about Harold Nichols, you're talking about Bill Farrell and some of the great coaches you've been with and been under over the course of your career, when it comes time to structuring those particular portions of practice, what can you tell a young coach at, say, the middle school level who's breaking in? We were just talking about Daryl's brother Lee before we got started about coaching middle school kids. For example, if you're going to have a conversation with Lee Weber about coaching middle school kids on the balance of independence and dependence for that level of age group, what are some of the tips that you can give him or any other coach in that situation?
Well, I think it's mostly that they have to go in and learn what they have first. I know that a lot of people want to go to practice, a lot of coaches, and immediately start instructing, immediately start barking, immediately start paving the way and making sure they're molding these kids. But they got to see what they have. And it's almost like you come in at the beginning, and I know these kids don't know a thing. Or maybe I think that. And so I got to structurally go right into dependence, but I really don't know. And that's why it's almost like 1 or 2 days, first of all, you're going in and you kind of throw the ball out there, which I shouldn't say that because we don't have a ball, but we throw the headgears out there and we just kind of blow the whistle maybe, or say, okay, you got 15 minutes, you got a 5-minute period. You warm them up maybe because you don't want to get anybody hurt. So you warm them up, you do a bunch of gymnastic stuff. You see, right there I can find out whether anybody knows anything, if they know how to warm up for wrestling. Or the fact, do they know how to tumble? Do they know how to be a gymnast? Can they forward roll? I got that tells me right there whether I got some athletes or whether I got some people that are like, they don't know what they're doing. And if they don't know what they're doing, then I'm really going to have to, play games, or I might have to let them play basketball. But, if they've done that. But it's almost like I'll bring in a hoop then and put it on the end of the wrestling mat, and they can run back and forth. And the old Russian, not dribbling, just carrying the basket and shooting. But more than that, it's something that after 2 days you can definitely go in and you know what you got, and you won't be running people off. You can use your dependence a little bit more because you kind of know the people a little bit better. I mean, you're not going to know them in 2 days, but you're certainly going to know them a lot more when you let them go out and you find out what kind of initiative they have, and you find out what kind of skills they have, what kind of ability, and what kind of conditioning they're in, and all that kind of stuff. So the ability to push themselves, you'll find out right away. You'll learn a lot about which ones know how to compete already, which ones don't. So, that's kind of my big suggestion is don't get in a big hurry. Analyze what you got and go from there. And I'll tell you what, you'll be saving a lot of time and effort when you do it that way, because you are actually more in an educational type of mode because you're getting educated. And you want to go in there to educate them, but you need to be educated. So, if Lee Weber takes his job at the junior high and he hasn't been a wrestling coach before, really he's going to spend some time finding out what he has. And then he knows wrestling. So he's not going to force all this wrestling on some kids that's already been wrestling for 3 or 4 years, but he's definitely going to add to it and let them do what they're capable of doing. And his difference is really fine-tuning, making sure that the ones that hadn't been there kind of go from scratch. And that, at the end of the day, if you have a squad of 20, you still have a squad of 20 instead of having a squad of 10 or of 15. I mean, your goal should be really to not run anybody off. In fact, get the word out that they're having so much fun that other people are going to come out, because that's the nature of building championship sports in the long run. When I was in Waterloo growing up, a ton of kids were out for wrestling because West High had a great wrestling coach. East High had a wrestling great coach. And Cedar Falls had a wrestling great coach. So all of a sudden, all the parents wanted their kids to try this, whether they were really accepted for it or not, because they were going to learn some values that they wouldn't get anyplace else. So, that's my best advice right away.
Yeah, Coach, I think you hit on so many good points so far. But one, and you always talk about this is, having, no matter what level you're at, whether it's brand new kids or it's a veteran high school team or a college team, whatever, going in with a game plan, but always being flexible to change, on the fly in practice and reading what they need. And you kind of touched on going into the, even a brand new middle school program, you're going to go in and kind of feel them out. You're going to go in. I see a lot of people doing exactly what you're talking about, going in saying, hey, this is what we need to do. And they're just cramming stuff down a team's throat and running them off. And I think that's a really important point, is that you got to go in with a game plan, what you want to get accomplished, but be ready at any point to change things on the fly with the ultimate goal, like you said, making sure everybody in that room has a good experience.
I don't remember ever writing out a game plan for a practice and being able to stick to that game plan.
Yeah.
It's just about the only, because everything's not going to go exactly the way you think it's going to go. Yeah. But at the same time, once you become a little more towards those independent days, you're probably going to have the ability to not have to change as much, because they are really the practices that the kids get the most out of themselves, because they got to push themselves. And if they're not, you're always helping verbally. And the last part of practice, that's where you want to help more verbally in an independent practice more than anything, just because, they're going to get to a point where they need help. And that's what you're there for. And that's just an independent type thing. So, a lot of practices, they kind of are dependent on, I never let just the warm-ups go independently. I always add a few more minutes on, just to make sure that from an injury point of view that they're ready to go.
Yeah, you're almost just in those type of scenarios, as you get with the higher level kids and it becomes more independent, you're just kind of giving them nudges in the right direction rather than standing over them with a fully structured practice.
Yeah, mostly. But, it's like, here's the thing, so you just don't want injuries to happen. And until they've actually wrestled a couple minutes hard, your injury chances are probably going to be in those first couple minutes when they're really not ready to perform. They think they're warmed up, but all of a sudden their performance is and their whole practice might get turned down a little bit, just because they may get tired earlier because they weren't really ready to go to that level of championship performance in a practice right at the beginning. So if you're a coach and you're going to do something like that, then, you got to run an extra few sprints. You got to hit a few extra executions, where you're actually live hard drilling.
Do some hand fighting.
Have some tough hand fighting, some down on the mat drills like hip heisting and switching and, just boom, boom, guy stands up, picking him up, kind of slamming him down. But if he's not ready to get slammed down, you're going to hurt him. So, in fact, that's a danger area. A danger area in wrestling is anytime somebody's on top of you in a rear standing position. You always have to be careful there. That's one of the most dangerous positions. And it's because they can trip you to the mat, and there's your ankles, your knees, your hips, your hands, your elbows, and they can pick you up and slam you on your shoulders, and so, that's one position that I'd say that when I've been hurt, it's the most common position. And a lot of times where it was like, I'd feel overconfident and I'd give somebody too much. And so you have to be a little careful how much you're giving somebody, because it doesn't take long for somebody to do a move and catch us, even if it's, and it's a good wrestler. You just, the joints only go certain ways, and they're not a 360 type rotation. So, you you can get a lot of ankles and knee sprains by in a guy's behind you in a rear standing position. So even when I get there, I'm kind of in a mode where I protect myself by squatting and getting my arms down. I'm going to catch a leg coming in, those types of things. So
that's funny
you learn.
It's funny you say that because anytime I teach a stand up, you teach them the right mechanics. Like you said, squatted, looking for hand control and all that. And I said, obviously this is the best way to get out, but if nothing else, if you're standing straight up, you're going to get dropped on your head, or you're going to get an ankle or a knee or something hurt. You're exactly right. The one thing that you're talking about independence. I think a lot of coaches, especially as you get down younger in high school and middle school, and they get excited, and I think independence or giving up the dependence part can be hard a lot of times for them. You get a coach that's really excited to get season going, or get a program going, or get working with their kids. And I know when I first started high school coaching, I would go in and I'd write up a game plan, and there would always be way too much on that piece of paper. And I learned real quick that I was only getting through about a tenth of what I really thought I was going to be able to get through. But you got to realize, like you said, you got to build that independence. Is that something that you notice as well? Coaches getting in there and just trying to run too much, structure too much.
No, I think it's not really their fault totally. Sometimes that's their thinking, that they want to be in complete control, because if they're not in complete control, then what's going to happen is these kids they're going to get in trouble, or they're going to be this way or that way. What you want to do is just the opposite. You want to get those kids to have complete control. Then you don't have to worry about it. When you're only the guy in control, you're only with them for 2 hours. You want to actually let that go a lot more than 2 hours. It'd be nice to have that independent thing 24 hours a day, so you don't have to worry about them at night getting in trouble. So you don't have to worry about how many girlfriends they got, how much beer they're going to drink. They are smarter when they become their own people, and they have good, and when they can make the right decisions. When they're always dependent on somebody, they're always looking over their shoulder to see who's looking at them. When they're doing things, it's almost like I have to sneak to do it. It's.
You're exactly right. And as a high school coach, that's always a fear, is you might not give your kids enough credit. What would you suggest somebody in that situation? Obviously the whole goal is for a kid to develop an internal drive and learn to train themselves and push themselves with the guidance of a coach. What's the first steps, or how do you kind of cross that bridge?
Well, you have to develop some really good relationships, and you have to kind of know more than just what he knows about wrestling. You have to know kind of his social life. You kind of have to know how his academics are. You have to know who he hangs around with. You have to know what his parents are like, and then you can make better type of decisions with these individual kids, or even with the team, because sometimes you get a whole team because they're from the same area of the neighborhood, that might happen. So then there's a pattern there, and that pattern will kind of help you make certain decisions and structures and the rhetoric that you use. And it's still never going to be perfect. Yeah. But the definite really details there is that you got to know this kid inside out. And the more you know about him, the more you're going to be able to help him eliminate some things and not have to worry about it, because he'll take those on. But, it's easier said than done. They're still going to, you got to try out with a kid, and he all of a sudden it's 2 weeks before the season's over, and it's the final tryouts, and he gets beat, and he thinks his season's done, his wrestling career's done that year. And so, he's going to go out and be a different guy. He's going to be mad, and he's going to take it out on something. But you know what? You also got to know that. And so you got to have a few words with him before he leaves, or you have to even talk to their folks. So, there's still ways to handle all situations, but even though there are ways, there's still going to be errors.
Yeah.
There's still going to be mistakes.
You're totally right. It's all it's all having a message, that you want to get across to these kids, and belief system, and, kind of, lifestyle that you want them to follow and communicate, why it's important. You can't just shove it down their throat. You communicate why it's important. And this is a routine thing. This is part of what I go back. I always talk about how, I always had talks before every single wrestling practice, just like you basically did, because there was always some kind of message just getting delivered. And it might be the 1,000th time you talk about it before it really sinks in with a kid. And then seeing, like you said, seeing potential issues that are coming up and addressing them, and that's, that's what it's all about.
Right. I mentioned that hot yoga thing, and that bothers me because I can't do anything about it. I might be able to. I'm going to find an angle to do something about it. But, it's basically they had somebody that never been in a class. So you got a new person that walked onto the wrestling program, and it's all of a sudden that new person that walked on the wrestling program has to do the same thing from day one that everybody else is doing. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not the case if they've never wrestled before, or they haven't been working out or that type of thing. So, but the thing that makes me mad is that then if they run them off, if you don't do things right, then they're going to go badmouth your program.
Yep.
And then you're going to have parents badmouthing it.
Yep.
And you're just not going to have the word that you want out about your sport, about your program. And it makes a big difference. And then I read about this hot yoga person, and they said right in the end, though, is that, well, I'm out teaching you regular yoga, and I'm just doing it because I'm kind of wanting to. I'm doing it in spite. I want to show this person, this, and I'm going to keep, bad mouthing their program, and I want to get their people to come to my program. So, it's not a good situation.
Yeah. The number one question that I get routinely through Attack Style Wrestling from high school coaches mainly is how to run a practice with multiple skill levels, experience levels all at once, and I had a strategy for that. Like we talked about, I always have a game plan coming in that was geared towards what, the bulk of my team needed.
We'll get the answer to that question and more on part 2 of our interview with Dan Gable on the next episode of the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast.
Show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.